If you plan to configure WSUS in your lab environment, you do need to have access to the internet for your virtual machines. Some of you may already have your virtual machines accessing the internet. Others may have your virtual machines on an isolated network. So if your virtual machines do not have internet access, these are a few things we want to make sure you do before you set it to connect to the internet. The first thing, if you have configured DHCP, we want to make sure we disable any DHCP scopes. A concern is if you connect that to an external network, it would attempt to lease addresses to your home computers or just other devices on the network. So be sure if you have DHCP enabled that we just disable the scope. We also need to configure networking if you're on an isolated network. Again, if your virtual machines have internet access already, you don't have to do anything, it's just going to work. With this, if you are using VirtualBox, you need to set your network to network address translation, or you can actually set it to bridged, either one. I just say normally set it to NAT because it's going to work, but NAT or bridged, either one would work. Once you set that to bridged or NAT, then we need to drop down, and in the virtual machine, we need to set the virtual machine to obtain an IP address automatically. Once you do that, it should connect through your network to your router or whatever device is providing DHCP. It'll obtain an address and then it'll have internet access, and we can proceed with the install of WSUS. Once WSUS is installed, you've downloaded all the updates, you can just reconfigure this back to the way it was initially set up. If you're using Hyper-V, a similar configuration. In Hyper-V, I need to set the network to be external. So the virtual switch in Hyper-V, if it's on private or internal, we simply want to set it to external so it connects to your actual network. Once you've done that, then we want to set the IP address to obtain automatically as well, and it will connect to the internet. Now, just to put a face to these things here, I do have the steps just where you need to navigate to configure each of those if you're unfamiliar with those settings. But to put a face to that, I'm going to switch to my virtual machine. If you're using VirtualBox, just click on your virtual machine, select Settings, the Network tab in the Settings window, and under your adapter, you can simply set this to NAT or bridged. Either one of those will connect you to the network. Once you're done, if you want this to be isolated, you can set it back to internal, and it won't communicate with your network, so you don't have to worry about leasing IP addresses or anything like that to other devices. So that's how we make that change there. So NAT or bridged, either one will connect you to the internet. In a Hyper-V environment, I simply want to go to my virtual switch manager in the Hyper-V manager. I want to select the switch I'm actually using. In my case, I actually named the switch private. Well, whatever you named your switch in Hyper-V, select that switch here and simply choose external. This will give you a list of all the network adapters in your machine. Choose whichever one you're using. So normally you'll have an Ethernet adapter and a wireless adapter if you're on a laptop. Just choose whichever one your machine is actually connected to the network with, and your virtual switch will now send all its traffic through that network adapter. So select whichever adapter is appropriate, click OK. Now the machines that use that virtual switch have internet access. Inside the virtual machine itself, if I want to disable DHCP, I can go to Tools, DHCP. I'm going to expand my DHCP server. I'm going to expand IPv4. I'm going to adjust this window. I have a scope. So this scope currently leases IP addresses. I'm simply going to right click this scope and I'm going to choose deactivate. I'll click yes, and a little red arrow shows up, so it's deactivated. Now, if you are running DHCP and you deactivate this, a weird thing in the interface that I get asked about quite often, when you come here, when you expand this IP version 4, be sure to left click on the scope first. Many people will expand IPv4, they see the scope show up, then they simply right click the scope, and you do not get the full menu if you have not left clicked the scope first. Microsoft considers that to be in focus when you actually left click on it. So it's just one of the oddities in DHCP. So just be sure you left click or double click first, then right click if you intend to disable that. Now, many of you are probably not even running DHCP in your lab environment, so you'd have no concern, but just check that. Once that's done, just go to the network adapter in the virtual machine itself. I'm going to click on Change Adapter Settings. I'm going to right-click my adapter and go to Properties. I'm going to select TCP/IP v4, the Properties button, and I will obtain an IP address automatically and obtain the DNS server address automatically. Now, my computer will automatically attempt to obtain a DHCP address from my actual production network that I'm actually using. That should get your machine to the internet, and you'll be able to fully follow along with the WSUS configuration.